Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we're here with Dario Nardi, and we're here to talk about the different cognitive function stacks of the ENFP and the ENTP. So the extroverted intuition dominance. So Dario Nardi, as we talked about in our previous episodes, he is the creator of the CPA, otherwise known as Keys to Cognition for us common folk. And so you've probably taken his cognitive function test online. And so he's aggregated the data that he's compiled from that into patterns and he put it through statistical analysis and it emerged different results in terms of the common cognitive function stacking for the different types. And so he's here today to elucidate what he has discovered from his assessment and let's unpack it together. So, Dario, I'm curious if you can let us know a little bit more about this.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we dive into the dominant extroverted intuiting types, ENTP and ENFP, the CPA or the keys to cognition. If folks have been to that, they'll see it's not like Myers-Briggs at all. The questions are not A or B, this or that. They're all individually rated. So it allows people to get a profile of the 8 cognitive functions, which might fit the classic one ring of perfect theory or might actually not match it at all. And it's really not a surprise because people have different life experiences, they have very different jobs. We ask people to rate them in terms of skillful use, also, not deep preference, and maybe people don't even know their deep preference. So the skillful use combined with the different life experiences is going to provide us with different stacks. And now that we have over 200,000 people, and a lot of those people are NP types, so we have literally tens of thousands of data points. And among those many thousands of people who score as, say, extroverted intuiting dominant, and they're responding the same ways to the questions, which may match the traditional stack, but usually don't. And so we want to understand, like, what is going on? What are people actually facing in the context of the culture and society and upbringing and their careers? And this is sort of a different way of thinking about type. And I want to say also, I'm not the one doing the statistics. I'm working with a team at Johns Hopkins University, led by Dr. Mina Barmani. And the dude who is doing the statistics is not invested with or even knows very much about type at all, and is simply giving us the results. So very, very little chance of, like, this is what we're seeing, and very little chance of bias or seeing patterns that maybe aren't there.
You're having a complete third party analyze the results, so it's not biased by the hands of people who like type in any sort of way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. And so we can start with the ENTP if you'd like.
Mhm.
And I'm curious to learn about the holistic version to start us off.
Yeah, absolutely. And just before we dive into that, I'll talk a little bit about just extroverted intuiting in terms of how it was reflected in the actual questionnaire items, as we call them. So what are the three? There are more than three any questions, but the three that had the highest statistical performance, like very good enough for peer-reviewed social science journal publication, offering various unrelated ideas and see what potential they might suggest. And notice those words: unrelated ideas, seemingly unrelated. What potential they might suggest, not options for action, is potential and what's suggested. Enjoy playing with random interconnections and patterns, weaving into the current dynamics of a situation aspects of other random contexts. Notice that there's almost this word random and unrelated. It appears in all three of them. And I think this is a very important feature of extroverted intuiting to understand. And I've seen it in the brain imaging, that there really is, anytime they're in a context, they're thinking about other contexts or situations at the same time, especially when they're ENTP or ENFP. So this is their dominant lead function. And this is why they're so good at noticing patterns, because they're like, well, I've seen this before in this other kind of situation, or I'm seeing this currently when you and I are together in this other situation and not just even in this current one. And then they're weaving that in, and sometimes that can be really obvious and slightly obnoxious. or like weird, like, why are you talking about this when we're doing that? But many times it comes in quite magically and invisibly and looks as like, oh, wow, like that's a really great insight that you just said about the situation. And so that's, it's not all brainstorming baloney from the sky. There's a lot of awareness of all of what is the potential of the situation that I'm in. And that's, and I think that ENTP is a really great example to start with the holistic version. And the holistic versions are quite common in the neuroscience and even in this data here, fairly common. So what are we seeing with that? So of course, extroverted intuiting and introverted thinking are quite strong. And they have also some just NT in general. And this is a pattern we see across all of the types, that people sort of specialize, not just in their sixth function, but just in their fifth and sixth. And it's a different way of thinking about the function stack. Even John Beebe has said those numbers 1 through 8 are just arbitrary numbers and don't actually reflect the person's development. They're just for to have a common language. I think what stands out for this one is that they tend to be a little bit more like, I want to say, longer term vision. Maybe that's not a driving vision, but anytime they get ideas, they can see the bigger picture that comes with those ideas, as if there's some introverted intuiting in there. And then also some extroverted sensing, which might sound weird, but I know several ENTPs who are quite good at martial arts, for example. Most of their hobbies are physical activities. But when you get them talking, wow, it is the extroverted intuiting. And where it will show up in their work is this idea of like, okay, it's an idea-driven project, but we want to actually take action on it. Like, let's do something with it. So this is very much the entrepreneur ENTP. And just looking at the brain imaging data, we also saw this entrepreneur ENTP a lot. Rapid prototyping, product design, consulting about products and systems and services, research and development, marketing, advertising. I think technology innovation today is like a really big thing that they're going to be in. Usually going to be good at the troubleshooting in the crisis or the early stages, coming up with the ideas, and then very quickly going from, ooh, here's some nuggets of ideas, to like, oh, imagine, sort of pie in, I don't want to say pie in the sky, we'll call it moonshot. Okay, is a moonshot, like, let's see if we can do this bigger thing to make it happen. And I often notice that with ENTPs. So this version could look also like ENTJ sometimes, because they will go to that bigger picture of the potential, because the project or the product has the potential to get this big, or potentially ESTP if we know them only in, say, a social context, and don't really see them, with all of the idea generation part. Where they have a weakness is going to be in the feeling domain, both forms of feeling. So when they have social engagement, which they're going to do because they have extroverted intuiting, which is pretty social, it can be pretty social, is going to be matched with introverted thinking. So it's going to be like challenging, witty, playfulness, but like in a sort of competitive way. Not that kind of deep emotional bonding or resonance like an ENFP could have, for example. ENFP is the master of, in contrast, of creating a feeling that we've always been friends in just a few minutes. And that is, so it's a very different that way. So very probing, very curious type, fine with boundaries, different perspectives, like running the sort of mental what if engine, loves the friendly debate, loves the wittiness even of a social conversation. And then their weaknesses are going to be, what is the next shiny thing? Not following through with the current idea. Very, very rarely is that nugget of an idea, which they talk about in big terms, is that actually going to come to something big. And some over analysis, I would say, like over critiquing, in terms of like arguing the ideas, and then people are like, we're done arguing about the ideas, like let's just take a break. And then this version, being holistic, as most holistic folks are, is not great long term in a traditional organization. So not going to do well with like standard operating procedures and all of that. That's not what they're hired for. That's not what their strength is. And also they can get into trouble interpersonally if they're around for too long, being blunt unintentionally. I think a lot of times it does come as a surprise. I remember years ago, ENTP sat down next to an ESFJ at a birthday party, and it was the ESFJ's birthday, and he managed in the first line of the first sentence, even to me as an INTJ, to insult him, the birthday boy, and not in a playful way, because of just like a certain obliviousness that can happen. So very entrepreneurial, does not fit in well with traditional structure organization, and the feeling domain is like constantly a challenge for them.
This is the stereotypical ENTP, and they're strong with the NT functions, so first, second, fifth, and sixth.
Yeah.
And they are well represented in the literature about ENTPs.
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is the theme that we see all the time with across all of the types, pretty much, is there's a version that just specializes in thinking and intuiting or sensing and feeling, like the functions, and it doesn't matter how it comes out. And so this type can be seen at times. In theory, it could be INTP or ENTJ, but I think that they're pretty extroverted and open in the way they do things, and so more likely ENTJ or even ESTP. And there's ESTP and ENTJ are commonly confused with each other. They both have directing communication style and all of that. Probably the difference is that this ENTP is very strategic, and they're okay with something brand new. And whereas the ESTP is much more tactical and in the moment, and usually doesn't have a big strategy, and is comfortable with taking risks, like, yeah, let's bet a lot of money on this business idea of, say, flipping houses or whatever, but is not comfortable with uncertainty. And I would say anybody who's confusing, or finds that, they're confused, is it extroverted sensing or extroverted intuiting, is the comfort with risk or uncertainty. And it's the uncertainty that is the and extroverted intuiting. The like, yeah, no one has ever done this before. We have no idea what the odds are. They're fine with that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's
And
some
then,
risk tolerance there.
yeah, there's a risk tolerance there. Yeah. And then there's so we're going to talk about it in a little bit different order, I guess, than the other videos. I'm going to talk about the holistic ENFP, which also came out really clearly in the data. And this is a mix of intuiting and feeling skills. So you look at the top 4 functions as they self-rate in terms of skillful use, NE, and then also we're talking about ENFPs. So introverted feeling, extroverted feeling, introverted intuiting. So they're going to be interested in like spiritual things and doing stuff with their community. So they're going to be change agents, storytellers, interpersonal connectors, the counselors, going to a group and like shaking hands and building rapport and community organizing and advocacy through the media. And they're very, very comfortable with the both sides of feeling. A lot of times they'll say they feel burned out by all the interpersonal part, burned out in the sense that they lose themselves, not burned out energetically, but they're like, who am I? And why am I doing this? And why am I here? And is this the best fit for me? Are these people I'm interacting with in this quest, is this authentic? So there still clearly is this ENFP side, but they have a pretty good introverted, intuiting, and extroverted feeling. So they can look like ENFJ or INFP. And then where they're going to have difficulty, of course, think of this like arts and social service kind of ENFP, is a very idealistic, is going to be pushed away from any kind of large formal organization, any kind of mundane work. Just as the holistic ENTP has a problem with feeling, the holistic ENFP has a problem with thinking. In terms of they're self-describing their problem as like, I'm terrible at all of this. So you will not find them in any kind of large organization or any kind of like analytical role where they have to sit at a desk and do something. They're just going to be warm and diffusive and again, instead of like a project, and this is where they can even look like the NTP with extroverted intuiting and introverted intuiting. There's all these seeds, and then with each seed, they can quickly see like, wow, like the big picture could be like this. And they're a great example where, ENFPs are one of the most future-oriented types. This is not my opinion. This is data from the Myers-Briggs company. That ENFPs are very interested usually in science fiction and like where different technologies are going into the future and what is the potential of this person and how I could see how they could be. They're not going to get that same tunnel vision that say an INFJ would get, where they're like, oh my, I'm finishing this project, which is this creative project from beginning to end. No, it's not like connecting with the muses, although they may talk about a muse, but it's introverted feeling muse that comes up there for them. And where there's many NF types, there's this constant like balancing between respect for the uniqueness of every individual and then the potential and quest of the group and the needs of the group, and how do we balance those. And for all NF types, that's something that's a theme that comes up. And really it's they can take some of their time to get organized, and they might go weeks or months or maybe even years in some cases trying to decide like, what is it that I want to do exactly. And they'll be drained when they just lack that conviction that is sort of pushing them along. And so that's sort of the holistic ENFP. So really, really good at brainstorming and dealing with multiple peoples and issues at once and all of that. And just like a classic idealistic ENFP.
This is the standard ENFP. Just like the videos we talked about before, they tend to have the N and the F functions very strong, as Dario was talking about. And so they can look like any of the NF types in a way because of that. This ENFP has a big heart with lots of love to give.
Yeah, and they can find with the extroverted feeling, because they're sort of role playing it and doing it well. They're consciously aware that this person has this need, or my role at this time is requiring this need. But they can get burnout from that, like overextending too much and not taking care of themselves.
Having poor boundaries.
And I think sometimes they can also just sort of drift away from any kind of like good money making source or practical job, because the vision is really big. And that could be great. I mean, I know ENFP very much like this, and he's led multiple missions of different kinds, like a religious one, like a spiritual one, in completely different places, totally different cultures of people too. Because like almost opposite cultures of people you wouldn't encounter together. But for him, he's like, hey, it's like different, the same challenge, different people, because people are people wherever you go. I think where this type, again, with the thinking, is like criticism, not welcome. The ENTP version of like being critical and like mental wordplay and stuff like that, they don't want that. They're also a version of ENFP that will be like sort of interested in type, but let's hold that interest really lightly. Because when it comes to actual, like, I'm sitting down with somebody, the ENTP is going to be like, let me use this mental model of type in order to troubleshoot the relationship. This ENFP is, let me get rid of type and any other mental model I have, so I can just be completely authentically emotionally present with this person. And that's as myself, and see how comfortable I am with this person as well as what's going on with them. So they're not just resisting the outer rules, but also even resisting mental models, like using them too much.
Makes sense, makes sense. And so, how about the atypical versions of what we would expect of these two types, starting with ENTP? What are the
Yeah.
two variations that you find that are against the norm?
Yeah. So in the data analysis for each dominant function, it breaks out into 4 what are called classes statistically. And 2 of the classes are really obvious that we've talked about, the holistic ENTP and holistic ENFP. The other 2 classes, technically they come out a certain way if we actually follow the tricycle model, that one of them is ENTP, is going to be analytic ENTP, and the other one is an analytic ENFP. But they're really, really, really close to each other. Really close. And I think they give us different windows. So this first one I'm going to talk about is ENTP, analytic ENTP, and it will all make sense. But then I'm going to say, imagine if this person were an ENFP and what is going on with them. And so I think that there's a case to be made to talk about, like, yeah, remembering there are more than 2 kinds of each type. And people can respond in different ways. So this analytic ENTP is, yeah, has extroverted intuiting and has thinking well developed in general. But the introverted intuiting, no. Instead, they have swapped that out for sensing. And this is going to be a version that is like leaning into, it's hard to say, like some other type. It's they're developing that extroverted thinking, which will allow them to get through organizations. They're going to be there. They're going to be any dominant type, which is also, if you prod them, like, what is your philosophy of life? What are your feelings? They actually can answer those questions. What are going on with the feelings of this other person? And this, they can do that. And they're just a version of ENTP that I say, like, is analytic, that could fit into an organization, and the same for ENFP. They could easily fit into an organization, the STJ organization. They're always going to be aware that they're stretching. They're going to be aware this is not the natural me. But they can do it. It's basically the ENTP who is trying to do some introverted feeling along with extroverted thinking, or it's the ENFP who's trying to do introverted thinking along with also the extroverted thinking. And that's just going to be, it's all like mid-stack kind of stuff. So it's like task driven. Oh, we're supposed to have structure and efficiency, right? Like, let's do that. So it's not normal, and they're being pushed out of their comfort zone. But it's important to remember that for this version, introverted sensing is last out of the 8. They're very aware, I don't actually fit here. I don't actually care about tradition. I'm not actually making comparisons to the past and trying to stick to those. They're just using thinking and feeling as ways to, like, navigate through the organizations in terms of efficiency, effectiveness, strategizing, other people's feelings, the politics in the organization. What are my personal feelings? How am I doing as a person? Where are my vested interests? So technically, this person comes out as ENTP, but it could be ENFP also pushed into the same situation. And we're going to encounter this again, by the way, with the dominant extroverted sensing types. They show the same pattern, shows it the same thing. 2 classic versions, and then 2 versions that could just be either one, that just had to adapt. And I think that sometimes a person says, like, I don't know if I'm ENFP or ENTP, because they're in an environment that is pushing them both to be a certain way. And so their natural self gets washed out a little bit. Yeah, and that's I think how they would show up is like this creative troubleshooting, innovation officer, anything that's process oriented, where they need a manager who thinks bigger and longer term, but has the skills to actually manage people. not manage them towards a quest, but although they might make that up in their mind, but like the organization requires processes. How do we like manage them within those processes? That structured system, how do we implement? They'll sit down fine with ESTJ and ESFJ and be like, okay, yeah, I can deal with these people. So instead of being the entrepreneur, it's like the intrapreneur. Inside the organization, inside their community, or maybe even family system. They're like, okay, I found all these different ways to adapt and like role play, and extroverted intuiting is great at role play. But there's still the core them that can get obscured. But I think from talking to folks who are like this, remind me of this, they're very aware of what they're doing.
Yeah, from the entrepreneur to the intrapreneur. I love it.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they rely upon that organization to actually give them the sensing structure and to execute with the sensing action stuff. And I think that this is a lot more of a sedate desk job kind of thing, rather than the ENTP entrepreneur who's out there, pushing the new products and ideas, or the idealistic ENFP who's like leading a community of people, leading it its own way, not in the ENFJ way, in the ENFP way.
Yeah. Well said, well said. So it seems like this version doubles down on the tertiary function. So for the ENTP, they more identify with the feeling or the FE, and the ENFP more identifies with the thinking or the extroverted thinking.
Yeah, as well as I think they're bringing in some of their sixth and even seventh functions, which is a really big stretch, but they can do it. Yeah, they can do. I mean, it's the ENFP who's asked to do some introverted thinking, because organizations have models and strategies, and then the ENTP who is going to have to make a personal choice about working in this kind of environment, and I think that shows up as like a spiritual side to them.
Got it, got it. So these are all about skillful usage. So it's about them leaning into getting better at these skills. So when your
Yeah.
environment calls you to be better at things, you will rise up to the occasion. Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
curious about the last form of these types, if you'd like to
Mm.
share.
Yeah, certainly. So this version technically scores out as ENFP, just barely. So this is why I've sort of mixed it up a little bit, because I'm like, yeah, there's definitely ENTP in here too. And this version, probably ENFP, but I think also let's just talk about the ENTP a little bit as we go. That they're a little bit more low key. That there's like this warmth and social attunement, like one-on-one. They're paying attention to people as they're doing things. So as an ENFP, it's like not the in-your-face, super energetic or super idealistic ENFP. This is an ENFP who's like warm and friendly and a little bit low-key, and does okay with a variety of situations in life, both conventional jobs and maybe some like unconventional ones, but they are paying attention to the social stuff. I hear a lot of ENFPs personally in my life, know lots of ENFPs who say that they feel they're way too focused on other people, meeting other people's needs. And they know how to do it, and they don't like it. So that is this version who's saying, yes, I have skillful use with extroverted feeling, and I don't like it. What they don't have that the other ENFP has is the big vision. So you hand them nuggets of things, or they start to brainstorm, and they don't take that brainstorming to some big picture thing. They're not thinking about, yes, it could be this project, or we can develop this together this way, or whatever it is. It's much more low key and minding that there's this other stuff we're supposed to be paying attention to, but not willing to like completely just blend into the organization. They're not willing to do that either. So basically they get by on like the feeling function and having meaningful relationships. And that really does matter to them. And they're not bad at some thinking. Um, but it's definitely not the place they're going to go to. They're going to prefer a job that's a much more one-on-one. There's lots of ideas. It's socially dynamic. They like connecting people and building relationships, but there's not a lot of like long-term projection that's happening or like big picture kind of stuff. So I think they're going to be in jobs that are much more like counselor, for example. Counselor is a great idea, like school counselor. Um, they might even work in a shop, and then the idea is, you're building connections with customers, and that's the kind of ENFP that likes. And I think my niece actually is a great example of this. That she's worked a variety of jobs over the years, as ENFPs are wont to do. Everything from what is it, like, like elder care, to like a school counselor, sometimes even substitute teacher. She loves all of these like stories of like, each one of them is a different story to live in. With the elder care, every elderly person has a different interesting story. And you might think, okay, this type can blend in as like ESFP, ESFJ, and absolutely a person who meets her for the first time might think, oh yeah, she's ESFJ or ESFP. No, I've known her all of her life. ENFP, her ability to see deeply at the psychology of the person across behaviors, across different situations, and that ability, like the love of like fantasy and science fiction, and just like this sort of rich idea, rich conversations. As soon as it's just her jobs didn't allow her to do that. And I think a lot of times dominant NE types, ENFP and ENTP, not all of them are in the upper management. That's just not the case. And we have to be careful in writing the type descriptions, which a lot of them are written in a way that describe sensing people are in mid or low level positions and intuiting people are in mid or high level positions. And that's not always the case in life. Nor do they maybe want to take on something big. Maybe they just want to enjoy life. So I think that they're going to be, in like some kind of education, creative collaboration, advocacy, but it's all like smaller kind of stuff. And this ability to like go at a pace, which I think is very nice. Their introverted sensing is pretty good. It's not great, but it's pretty good. Now, if they were ENTPs, which they could be mistaken for, there's a version of ENTP that has social skills and idea generation. And then you start to scratch underneath the surface and you're like, okay, here's the introverted thinking. But again, it's the same basic, like, more like, I would say, like almost like more local expectation. Like, this is my job. This is what I do. Here's my family. Here's my community. I'm just living my life. Here's like through humor and like helping others. This is how I realize my extroverted intuiting is in the moment to moment kind of experience. And again, they can fit in an organization, but it's not going to be in some kind of big strategic role. And they don't care about things like efficiency and effectiveness. That's not their go-to spot. So it's and I think it's for ENFP how it'll show up as like, yeah, I'm going to poke at some of these ideas, or maybe even ENTP, I'm going to poke at some of these ideas. Like, is what you're saying really makes sense? But they're not going to engage in the nitpicking or anything like that. Like, not go deeply into things. It's much more like a surface approach. And they're likely to be in a very interactive environment that's like on the floor. That's what I said, like shopkeeper, for example. There's a customer. You have to do something. You have to walk over to them and talk to them and do something for them. So they're going to be pushed, instead of into the SJ world, they're pushed into the SP world. And that SP world is not extreme sports or something. It's just like stuff dealing with people in like a low-key, easy way. And that's the data saying, yeah, these people exist. They're here. There's a lot of them. like many, many thousands in the database, all responding the same way. And I think it's just a reminder that not only do these two types often score very close on the MBTI, but they are not always. We should remember that there's like ordinary people who are extroverted, intuiting, dominant.
Yeah, they're not all completely feet off of the ground, unable to be practical. Some of them have to learn to be practical. So it seems like some of these cognitive function stack variations come from the nurture element, where they've had to grow into that to survive, to thrive in their environment. So, yeah.
Yeah, and to remember that these clusters here are broad statistical clusters, and that there are also micro clusters that represent, some percentage. So basically, these four broad clusters represent about 85% in total, which means that there's another 15% or 1 in 6 ENFPs or ENTPs who don't fit anything that I just said.
Mm. Yeah, there's a whole nother world.
Yeah.
So thank you, Dario, for showing us your research that you've done on the instrument that you've created. And so we'll see you all at Young for Life. I'm kidding. See you all in the
Yes.
next episode. Bye.
Yes.